Hi there, I'm Danny Flexen. Welcome to the latest edition of SecondsOut ReFLEXions. We're here every Monday, 4:30 p.m. to review the boxing action of the weekend just gone. And this week, we saw the return of boxing's #1 pound-for-pound fighter, certainly in my view and in the view of many others. Canelo Alvarez, the Mexican superstar, hopes to fight 4 times this year. Well, he certainly got off to an easy enough start to 2021 against Avni Yildirim, the Turkish Wolf. Was more like a sheep in wolf's clothing, to reverse that old analogy. Is it an analogy? Simile? Whatever you want to call it. He certainly reversed it, take my word for it. Very unambitious performance from Avni Yildirim, but I don't blame him. I think it's interesting how when it was first announced that Canelo would have to fight Yildirim as his WBC mandatory, and this would be the first fight of the year for Alvarez, the reception was broadly positive because people were willing to take an easy, on paper, fight for Canelo if it meant that we'd see him 3 or 4 times this year, preferably against the other super middleweight world champions, Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, in at least 2 of his other fights in 2021. But as soon as the fight ended, certainly on social media, that mood seemed to change. And people started to criticise the matchup enforced by the WBC and Yildirim himself for not putting forth more of an effort. But I felt a bit for Yildirim. First of all, he'd already made his money, $2 million, I believe, something like that. Career best purse for him. Nothing much was expected of him. So I don't want to blame him too much. He went for a hard training camp. And I think people say, well, he didn't put forth enough effort, he didn't throw enough punches. I think there's good reason for that. I think he was overawed by his opponent and by the occasion, but also I think he was getting hit early and often with those hooks, particularly to the body and the uppercuts. And I think that kind of made him more wary of leading off. We know Yildirim more often as a pressure fighter, someone who gets on his opponent's chest, pushes him back. Canelo's very solid, even though he's only recently been at super middleweight. He's been up at light heavy, of course, for that one fight. He's a very solid guy. He's not the tallest, but he's got a wide back, muscular. He's not, a brittle guy, and it's hard to push him back. But also, his hand speed and his shot selection is so good that leading off against him is a recipe for disaster for fighters, unless you've got exemplary defense and fast hands yourself, and fast feet as well. And Yildirim hasn't. Joel Diaz trains Yildirim. I'm sure he worked him very hard in camp. I'm sure they had a game plan that they felt would give them the best chance of staying in the fight. But there's only so much you can do with the raw materials. Yildirim hasn't got the fastest hands. He hasn't got the fastest feet. The one area where Diaz felt that he could match Canelo was power, but we never really got a chance to see his power because he was put not literally on the back foot, but certainly mentally on the back foot, or metaphorically on the back foot from early on. Canelo, you didn't know what shot was coming. He used that left hook that he shaped up to the body and then threw it to the head instead, which we've seen before. He used pretty much every shot in the book. He didn't use his jab much after the first round because he saw it was pretty pointless to do so because Yildirim came forward or plodded forward with that high-held guard. The jabs were often landing on the gloves, but as soon as Canelo went round the sides with hooks or through the middle between the elbows with uppercuts, he knew that was the recipe for success. And Yildirim, I think once he started feeling the power of Canelo, the hand speed, like how quick and often he was getting punched, how cleanly and accurately he was getting punched as well, I think it made him second guess, because if he were to open up, he'd get hit with even more shots and even more cleanly, at least by having a safety first approach, although it wasn't great for the fans perhaps, or for his chances of winning the fight, which were already pretty slim to be fair. By tucking up, moving in with his hands held high, at least he wouldn't take as many headshots, I suppose. You don't really, I guess as a fighter, you don't really think about those things when you're in the ring. You don't think, well, I'll tuck my hand. It's not a logical process in your mind. It's just more, if you know you're getting hit a lot, you're going to tuck up more. And he was getting hit hard and often from the start. It did seem, I think it was round 2 or round 3, landed one clean right hand, which Canelo just shook off. But he never seemed to really commit to his punches, Yildirim, for the reasons we've already discussed. And I think against Canelo, unless you are a kind of counter-punching boxer, maybe with a bit of a dig, which is, I think, the style that Canelo would most struggle with, particularly if the opponent's rangy and can afford to keep, or try at least to keep Canelo at distance, then you have to do the other tactics, which are to stay right on him, cut down his space, keep tucked up, elbows in as well, not just at the head, and move your head and be quick on your feet. You know, pressure him, hit, take what you need to take on the gloves, and then get back out. Yildirim wasn't capable of doing that. He wasn't quick enough, he wasn't smart enough, and he wasn't confident enough. And confidence against Canelo is incredibly important, even if you're the most confident fighter in the world. And bear in mind, Billy Joe Saunders, who Canelo slated to fight on May the 8th, Caleb Plant, who he may fight later in the year, not only are they slick and quick operators, they're also very confident. They've got plenty of self-belief. But I think against a fighter like Canelo, who hits you when you think you're well protected because his shot selection, his hand speed's so good, that confidence can evaporate very, very quickly. I think with Yildirim, maybe it was never there, and you can understand why, because of the chasm between the two in terms of levels. But other fighters we've seen, you know, Callum Smith obviously had that injury, which didn't help him. But I think his confidence went quite early on as well, because he knew that Canelo, it's all very well watching Canelo and thinking how good he is from a TV screen or even at ringside. But I'm guessing once you get in with him, it's a completely different story. And then you really get an appreciation of just how good he is. Another thing I didn't like in the aftermath, aside from criticising Yildirim, who, you know, he didn't make the fight, he didn't decide the purse, and he gave as much as he could when he was in there on the night, was the sudden kind of glut of video clips of Canelo's only defeat, Floyd Mayweather, several years ago now, and people saying, just remember, as good as Canelo is now, Floyd beat him, wasn't even close, Floyd dominated him. Yeah, these things are true, but to keep churlishly bringing that up every time Canelo wins a fight, it's just silly, because there's nothing to say that a peak version of Canelo wouldn't beat a peak version of Mayweather. No, I don't think he would. I think Mayweather always wins that fight because of the styles and just how good Mayweather was. I was a huge Mayweather fan. Having said that, though, it is all just conjecture at this stage. We saw a Canelo who was yet to reach his peak, both physically and form-wise as a boxer. You know, he's a lot more refined now. He's faster on his feet than he used to be. His shot selection's better. He's more intelligent. You know, he doesn't get discouraged as easily. Certainly, he's a much more confident, composed boxer. His work rate's a bit better as well. He still likes to fight in bursts, but his work rate's better than it was against Mayweather. But some of that is down to Mayweather, of course, and what he did in the fight. I'm not discrediting him at all. But there certainly was, you know, a big distance between the two when they fought. But I think certainly if they fought now, although I'd still, not now, sorry, because Mayweather's not what he was, but if they fought prime for prime, while I would still favour Mayweather to win, I think it'd be a much closer fight. You know, we saw a prime Mayweather get pushed quite hard by Oscar De La Hoya, who was past his prime at the time. So I think a prime Canelo, who's younger than De La Hoya was at the time, who's bigger, up at super middleweight now, but even at middleweight, a bigger fighter generally, you know, more thick set. And just tactically and technically at his very peak, I think it is a very close fight, prime for prime with Mayweather. But even if it's not, why use someone else's supremacy, dominance, whatever you want to call it, to discredit the man in charge now? Mayweather's retired, he does exhibitions, whatever, that's fine. But in terms of normal boxing, he's not a factor anymore. And people trying to make him a factor on social media only serves to take away from Canelo, who is currently the best fighter in the sport today. We will see if that stays the case when he takes on Billy Joe Saunders. A lot of people believe Saunders' style will pose him problems. That seems mainly to be based on the trouble that Canelo had with Erislandy Lara, which seems like a lifetime ago now. And he's improved hugely since. But hey, pinning someone down, it's certainly got to be harder than, you know, someone marching straight forward and not throwing punches like Yildirim did. But Saunders, for me, is a better middleweight than a super middleweight. So I think Canelo will have natural size in the fight, although Saunders may be a little bit taller. Saunders is fast, he's slick, he can take a punch. I'm not sure he hits as hard as Canelo up at super middleweight, so I think that's an issue as well. You know, will he hit hard enough to make Canelo second-guess his approach to keep him off him? But this isn't going to turn into a Saunders-Canelo or Canelo-Saunders preview. But I think it'll be interesting to see how Canelo adapts to a different style. Saunders very different from a Callum Smith, very different again from a Yildirim. So it's good not only to see Canelo busy and trying to unify the division, but taking on different styles, because otherwise people always hold it against him. Well, yeah, he did well against him, but how would he go against a real good pressure fighter? Or how would he go against a real good slickster? So we shall see the slickster argument certainly in May. And I'm sure Billy Joe's already preparing diligently, and I'm sure Canelo will be back in the gym soon as well. Ian Darke, former Sky commentator, now mostly concentrates on football for BT Sport, called it a mismatch immediately after it was announced, which I thought was interesting. I don't see it as a mismatch necessarily. We'll see how it plays out on the 8th of May, but Ian Darke's not always known for these controversial or bold opinions, so fair play to him, even if I don't agree with him. I think fair play for putting your sticking your head above the parapet and straight away just saying, like, literally with the fight poster above you just been announced, kind of pissed on Saunders cornflakes a little bit maybe, but just, yeah, mismatch, one word tweet, love it. I need to be a bit more bold like that. I used to be, but then everyone started like blocking me, so I've restrained myself a little bit since then. But yeah, getting back to the point, Canelo absolutely dominant against Yildirim, as you would expect. I expected Yildirim, as I said in FLEXpectations on Thursday, to go 5 rounds. So it was 2 rounds out. He got retired at the end of the 3rd round by a compassionate Joel Diaz. We don't see that enough from corners, to be honest, retiring their fighters when they're under the cosh and have no chance of winning, which he didn't. So fair play to him for that. For fans complaining, just remember, DAZN and Matchroom Boxing USA signed this fight as part of a 2-fight deal to get Canelo in harness so they could have him for Cinco de Mayo weekend against one of their fighters, which they're doing against Billy Joe Saunders. So if we view it in the same way, and obviously we've invested in DAZN in the same way DAZN and Matchroom have invested in Canelo, let's just say that Yildirim is the starter that we have to get through, even if we don't particularly like it, to get to a more sumptuous main course. That's the way I'm going to look at it anyway. But I want to know what you guys think. What did you think of Canelo's performance? Were you disappointed with Yildirim, or did you expect him to be, as limited and unambitious as he was? And what do you think of the Saunders fight? Are there other people you would have preferred him to fight in May? Don't necessarily tell me that you think he's going to smash Saunders or whatever. We'll save that for the preview episode, if that's your belief. But just tell us, are there other fighters out there you'd have preferred to see Canelo fight in May? Caleb Plant we expect in September anyway, and we know that Canelo's goal at the moment is to unify those 168-pound belts. But, I've heard the names of Andrade mentioned, Charlo, people like that. Just tell us what you think. As someone else said recently, the only person they could see beating Canelo at 168 would be Andre Ward if he came out of retirement, which I thought was really intriguing. I'm not sure Ward would be the same fighter now after such a long layoff, but prime for prime, again, I would have felt Ward would be a bit too big, a bit too technically and tactically sound for Canelo, especially as if he could make 168 safely. But if we're talking prime for prime, obviously Ward was at his best at 168, so that's my view. But yeah, let me know what you think of that as well. I'll be back on Thursday for FLEXpectations, 4:30, and the same time on next Monday for ReFLEXions once again. Really appreciate the time, as always, and I'll see you all soon. Cheers.